Okay, so we're in Kansas.
So rural Osage County, Kansas. I don't really know what all to tell you about it. It's sort of at the interface between kind of riverine woodlands and some upland hardwood forests and the tallgrass prairie.
Okay, so one thing I actually do need to ask, you haven't introduced yourself. If you would tell me your name and give me your professional background. I'm sure you have a couple letters behind your name
Lord.
too.
Yeah, so my name is Oscar Henry Will III. My people call me Hank, so I go by Hank, but most of my official publications, and when I say official, I really mean science and books and things like that. I use Oscar H. Will III as my byline. So a lot of people don't, necessarily, they're searching for Hank Will and they won't necessarily bring up those things. Because I just assume you're going to go Google search me now.
Oh, I've already done that.
Oh, you've already done it. Anyway, so, pretty conventional childhood, growing up, went to college, went to graduate school, really wanted to be a genetics professor, do research and stuff like that. And let's go this way. And did that, did the professoring thing. I went to school in Chicago. I had 3 job offers, and the lowest paying job offer was in South Dakota, but that was the closest to home.
Okay.
So that's where I went, and had a decent 15-year academic career. Was building my own farm at that time. We made hay, did about 4,000 free-range broilers. This was before free-range broilers were cool. I direct marketed those. I should say we direct marketed those. This would be back in the early 90s. And then one thing led to another. Our farm, we raised and sold native perennial flowers or plants, field grown, so that I could sell a huge tub of Liatris or something for, $30. Sioux Falls, South Dakota was burgeoning at the time with building, and so the landscapers loved to plant semi-mature stuff, even though I would always feel slightly guilty because transplanting huge plants in flower, you sort of diminish the possibility of them surviving.
What the market will bear.
Yes, right. So did that. Chasing after my wife, we went to Ohio. I sold my farm in South Dakota. I was going to try to manage it from there, but that wasn't going to work. And so I rolled it into a farm in central Ohio near Mount Vernon. Beautiful grass farm. And that's where I really got into the sort of, we quadrupled our Angus herd and really got into the intensive management grazing thing. And I did purebred Angus in those years. I taught a few classes at the local college too, but I, just because I could and I needed something to do to keep me out of pool rooms and whatnot. And let's see, then she took a job in California at Whittier College.
Okay.
And so I had this huge farm sale in Ohio, sold everything, land, little meadow vole,
Oh, a little,
like a mouse.
yep. Oh,
Yeah. And that was a time I think I first read Joel Salatin's books, and I'm like, oh God, I'm not the only guy out here doing this. And then I'd have people that wanted to come to the farm and learn about it, and I always thought, oh, I should start a magazine or something because people have questions, you know, or we should have a school where we could even teach people how to back a big trailer or something. And never got around to that, but that's sort of, I used to write articles about stuff like that and other things. And that ultimately got me lots of freelancing gigs with Grit, Mother Earth News, Farm Collector Magazine, even Gas Engine, I think, and other not Ogden titles.
I've noticed it's an eclectic mix that you have in your portfolio.
Yeah. So Ogden had Grit, and they were changing it from a monthly newspaper, tabloid style, to, and it started out as a broadsheet, but at some point it was converted to a tabloid. And they needed somebody to sort of spearhead the change because they wanted to chase after the rural lifestyle market. And they hired me to be the editor to help facilitate that. And that was in 2007, April. And I've been there ever since. So I was editor-in-chief of Grit. So our habitat here is really warm season grasses. They're grasses that come on in the heat of the summer, late spring, and they usually go dormant with the first frost. But you will see some stands of it that I haven't mowed or haven't been grazed too heavily, like this area, that you see their seed heads. They stand tall, and they're turning amber right now, amber and kind of, I don't know, beige, whatever that color is. But we're much greener than normal because we had, although it was a drought year, we had really well-timed rain events, from say 1/4 inch to 3/4 inch. So we're still short for the year, maybe 6 or 7 inches, but the way it was timed, we managed to pull off great hay crops and in this region, and great corn if the corn was planted early enough. Corn, you could have it right across the road from each other, and some of it had to be chopped for silage because it wouldn't fill grain because it was so dry. And the rest of it's combined, and it's, you know, average yields. It's not high yields. It's not a good way to make money anyway, commodity corn. But yeah.
So when we're looking behind us here and you see this open area and then you see the trees.
Right.
This is what it used to look like 200 years ago, or
No.
that's what it looked like you
So 200 years ago, this typically wouldn't be here. The slope across the road here, which you can't really see, but it's, so there's a river valley. We drop down into a river valley right here. It's called 110 Mile Creek. And so the land drops off in that area as well. And so that's a forest. It's a mixed hardwood forest, okay? These trees here were planted or allowed to grow from seedlings that birds dropped or what have you. So this area would have looked more like what you see out there. It would have been more tall grass prairie because there wasn't fire suppression. So lightning strikes would happen, it would burn, or it was burned on purpose by people to either drive game or, usually that, or to get rid of just roughage. And that keeps the seedlings out. You'll see cedar trees all over the place. There are these little evergreens. It's actually eastern red cedar.
Oh, sorry.
Clover.
I know, don't encourage.
Eastern red, I think it's Juniperus virginiatum or something like that. Anyway, it's mildly invasive here, so it was brought in because it tolerates drought and heat and damp really well, and it was brought in after the Dust Bowl as shelter belt trees.
So this is one of the things I really wanted to ask you about. What did it used to look like? What does it look like now? And how does your state of mind and your method of farming help to improve this? Because now one of the things on one of my quick web searches for you was that you're a grazier.
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, you can say it that way. And I don't, So I told you earlier that I walked with somebody on her journey through a cancer situation, and then that began pretty shortly after we bought this place. And so I have plans, which I've drawn out for all my subdivisions, to move the cattle and the sheep often, and I'm just years behind. I'm 5 years behind on that plan. Prior to coming here in Ohio, I was moving animals probably 3 times a day. We had record meat yields from the acreage that we had. We were increasing the soil organic matter by leaps and bounds every year because of the way we were managing the plant-animal interaction. So we'll have areas here that are little bit overgrazed. This is one of our sort of sacrifice paddocks where the sheep can come when water's in short supply, or we need to keep them close because we have some people coming to buy lambs the next day or something like that. But this isn't my ideal type of grazing right here. So this isn't set stocked, it's just had too many days of too much mob grazing.
But you are a person that likes to focus on reclamation and management and restoring something to
Yeah, absolutely. I think I love the native prairie because that's where I was born, up in North Dakota, and we spent a lot of time out there, and that's a native, would be a mixed grass prairie, so some tall grass species and short grass species. Lots of cool wildflowers right along the Missouri River there. And so it's quite a bit drier there, and that helps to manage the woods there also, because the forests there are all down on the river bottom, and they don't tend to come up and out like they do here. Here we get enough moisture that you can support trees up on the uplands. My goal is always to use animals in sort of the way that the bison might have done it, to kind of bring habitats back if I can, or to at least manage things without machines or as much sort of environmental disruption as probably the natural systems did do it. But it's all about control,
Well, this is one thing that we've been finding is a recurring theme, and that I find very attractive. It's sort of intelligent laziness in a way.
Yeah, right.
Because why put extra work to doing something when you can figure out a way to have nature do it itself?
No, totally. I mean, I don't even want to handle them, And I wouldn't say that I've never sprayed. I have had to spray sometimes, but not here.
Yeah. So, but you're a fan of letting nature solve problems for you. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. If you can give it a little nudge, or if you can, set something up so that the natural systems are at some advantage over the things that you're trying to manage. That's always my goal. It's way more fun. You got to use your head a lot more than you got to use your body, and it's to me it's a great puzzle.
It's a little subtler, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a lot subtler. Yeah, for sure.
Not a big stick. This is a gentler thing. May we walk up?
Yeah, let's walk
can we
out.
look at this? That would be great.
Let's go see if we can find the cows.
So, this is kind of interesting to me, you talking about this, the branching into the heritage breed portion of this, because that's another one of those things where people talk about, the advantages that you can have by allowing nature to do things for you that you don't necessarily want. So if I live in Florida and there's big, huge bugs, or if I live in Oregon and I've got a lot of parasites up there that are going to come through, there's a lot of animals that'll naturally tolerate these things, correct?
Oh, absolutely. So my scientific background is in genetics, and I'm a firm believer in using genetics to sort of work towards solutions that suit you. And so I've been working on what I call a land race of sheep. So in the olden days, and most heritage breeds would fall into this category, most of them were developed as land races, not all of them. And a land race is essentially a population that's been line bred to some extent, or interbred a little bit, but basically they were born and they died and they thrived in a specific region. It could be as specific as somebody's farm, okay? And then after 3 generations, here's the cows. There's basically a population of critters that are perfectly adapted to the conditions at that location.
Is that really only a 3-generation possibility there, or?
Oh, it can take you much more than 3. and when I say generation, I meant human generation.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, so a lot of
Because
years.
that's a big difference there, isn't
a lot
it?
of years, a lot of years of animal breeding. So I have sheep that are part Katahdin. They're about, the foundation stock, I'd say it's probably roughly 80%, 90% Katahdin. I got to do my math right here. About 8% Corsican, and the rest is Dorper. So they're all hair breeds, and they require. I selected really hard in the early years for parasite resistance and disease resistance, and we don't. I still have some syringes and I still have a little bit of antibiotic, but we haven't done any parasite control on them for 9 years.
Okay, so now you said something that I got really, that was very interesting to me. You just kind of gave up your recipe, didn't you? And
Nah.
no, but isn't that sort of the thing?
But I share
something.
the knowledge, man. I don't want to sell them. They work right here, but they're not going to work 20 miles from here, or they might work 20 miles from here.
Okay, you're saying all the right stuff, because this is something that we've been going over. Heritage breed animals are developed over time to do a certain thing in a certain place, and yet when we were talking to Matt yesterday with the Katahdins, one of the things that he said was, if they stay here in this area, they might lose a little of that pest resistance.
Or pest resistance, yeah.
So you have to keep improving and upgrading.
You just gotta go, okay. If you see a problem, go get a ram that's purebred Corsican and inject some more resistance into your flock.
Okay, so you need the ingredients.
Then you don't have pure, right?
Right.
And the people who are into the pure, which I have no problem with that. Yeah. But if you're into the pure, if you're selecting for a look, a conformation, even some genetic alleles, you're not selecting for parasite resistance or good mothering. I mean, usually you would float those traits on top of everything, but you can do it much more quickly if you're willing to stir the pot, basically.
Okay, so the economist in me says, untrained as I am, says you're kind of outsourcing specialty things from the places where they become. And so if you keep that ability to really maximize that characteristic, it's great to keep them separate, and we all have something to offer in diversity. Right?
Right, no, absolutely.
So you go to the St. Croix Island and you get the sheep and you put them in something in Oregon.
And see if they can hack it here, or someplace. Or maybe some of them can, and maybe they're not really super thrifty here, but if you can get a few crosses, what do the crossbreeds look like? What does a quarter cross look? What does an eighth cross look like? Yes. So you can, if you're good at selecting and you're patient and you have time, you can eventually get an animal that looks pretty much however you want it to look, that does performance-wise whatever you want it to do. But it takes time and energy, and a lot of times people fall in love with looks. So if you look at, a lot of the heritage breeds and a lot of the purebred dog standards and all of that stuff, it's a lot of it's got to do with how they look, or what their physical sort of stature looks like.
Right, and back of us is a great example of that. Those Highland cows are very unique, and boy, do they look interesting.
And they're probably really more predisposed to northern climates, but they do fine here in Kansas. And we've managed to find some females whose offspring shed pretty well, and so we don't have any issues with fly strike. And in the hot summer, they'll blow that fall coat off, or the winter coat off, and look a lot more slick. But most of them are already sort of getting into their winter.
A little shaggy.
Yeah, and that's not so much temperature driven. It's partly temperature driven, but it's also partly day length driven. So
now this is one of those things that the purists versus the people that say, you know what, I'm going to improve this breed.
Yeah, or make it do what you want it to do.
Yeah, but there's a little bit of a war going on.
That's because it's humans, right?
Yes.
Everybody wants to be right. The fact of the matter is nobody's right, or everybody's right. But you don't have to beat each other up about it.
Yes.
It's like, what are you after? If you want to have a perfect Scottish style Highland line, and you want to do it in Kansas, you're going to have to pump them full of all kinds of parasite, and you're probably going to have to shear them. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Because they're not genetically predisposed to thrive here.
Yeah.
And it took us a number of generations to get really, really good calving rates. And it was all about fly strike.
Yeah.
You know, so they'd calve in, late April, maybe, May, which is usually when I tried to time them, because we have good grass then. And the wet little fuzzy babies would come out, and the bot flies would, and the bottle flies would be all over them.
Yeah.
And so we would, we were spraying iodine on them. I mean, we didn't lose more than probably 2 to that, but then we had females whose offspring never got fly strike. So you can guess what I did with the females whose babies did get fly strike.
Yeah.
I sold them to somebody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody who, just wanted to have these cute fuzzy cows, and they were going to treat them like pets, and they'd be in the barn, and they were happy to shear them and all of that stuff.
So I look at that, and that's the perfect example of how all of this can coexist. But also, the individual farmers and ranchers that are traditionalists and saying we need to conserve this breed, that's a really valuable thing too, because you can say, hey, I want that characteristic.
Yeah.
So everybody can win.
Select from it. It's a genetic repository that everybody can draw on down the road. I think the biggest fear that I could have is that we would so specialize and everybody would raise the same genetic lines that you could lose some stuff. Could you get it back eventually? Yeah, maybe through mutation and whatnot. But yeah, I think they go together, because people like me, guys like me, I can say I really want to put together a breed or actually just a group of cattle. I don't even care if it's really a breed, that does this, tolerates my management scheme, and thrives.
But that's how all of these animals came to be over time anyway, right? The Spaniards brought the cattle into Florida, they get loose, they run around, and the ones
and eventually we have the piney woods.
Eventually you have a piney woods or a Florida cracker, these are the ones that make it. They either make it or don't. And so over the course
of it's the selection, and it's brutal to select. I mean, people don't like to have to select.
Yes.
Because they fall in love with their little critters. Or it's like a stock certificate, so if you're looking at it as dollars and you're culling, you got to find a market for the culls. You don't call them culls,
yes.
or you got to send them to the sale barn and take a hit. So.
But the cull doesn't necessarily mean you kill it. I have 8 chickens in my little San Diego farm. I have no intention of breeding them because we can't have roosters.
You can't have roosters.
But you know what? I bought my chickens from, I think, either My Pet Chicken or Murray one of those hatcheries, and I'm sure it was somebody's cull. It's not a show chicken.
No, exactly.
But it works beautifully for me. So that secondary market is
super important.
Is important for farmers that actually do want to make those breeding decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, totally. So, you could even go so far as to say, so this Highland group traces at least the bulk of its foundation stock to a large Highland ranch west of Auburn, Kansas.
Okay.
I think it's called Oz Highlands. And if we took and stood them side by side with a herd that had lived for a few generations, not a few human generations, say in Vermont or New Hampshire, they would look different.
Yeah.
They would behave different. They'd have different horn structure, and that's just the fact of the matter, that there's going to be some inbreeding, unless you're religiously AI everything, which you can do.
Which is also an interesting thing to me, because one of the benefits of heritage breed animals is that they naturally can procreate, correct?
Totally.
So that's one of those things
and take care of themselves, and
Okay, so this is something I wanted to ask you about. So one of mankind's goals is to adapt and to progress.
Progress, yeah.
And that's a relative term depending on who you speak with.
Oh God, absolutely, yeah.
You are involved with a magazine that is a cross of traditional values and, hey, new and great ways to do things. And so it's the same thing in many ways, I'm assuming, as the traditionalists and heritage breeds and the people that say, I can use that breed and cross it, make something. How do you handle that? It's kind of a philosophical
Yeah, I think the way I look at it is there's, if you want skinned cats, there's a million ways to skin the cat. And so if you want to preserve genetic diversity in any kind of livestock or poultry, you want to have people who are enthusiastically preserving specific types of diversity. And you want to have people who are actually figuring out ways to actually make a living using that stuff without selling breeding stock or what have you. And so, and sometimes you can do both with the same group. Depends on where you are and what the genetic background of your animals is and what your ultimate goals are. For me, I'm a lazy guy. I'm not really that lazy, but I am sort of a lazy farmer. I want my animals to be great moms. I want them to be able to have their babies without me, nursemaiding them. And I want them to thrive under these conditions in my management scheme with minimal input from me. Obviously, they see us, they're not unused to humans at all, but I also don't want them to be pets. I want them to know that they're cattle, so that we don't have bulls that, decide that they're people and they want to mate somebody, or I'm in competition with the bull for some cow or what have you. So, I mean, and again, I would say, you never turn your back on a bull, no matter who it is. But I it works. It can work, I think, for all those ends if, as humans, we can let it. Just don't touch the fence. Yeah.
I guarantee you, I'm not going to go near that.
All right, so this is what a warm season meadow that had been grazed would look like in this season normally. And so the dominant species here is Sorghastrum nutans, which is Indian grass.
Is that the one with the fronds on it?
Yeah, that's this one.
They're beautiful. Look, isn't that gorgeous?
Really, they make these really cool seeds. And it's a great forage grass. It kind of grows in clumps, so it doesn't make a sod like Kentucky bluegrass would or smooth brome grass.
Does it have nice deep roots to it if it has a clump?
Super deep roots, yeah, super deep. And then there's some blue stem here. This is what's called little blue stem.
I have heard of that. They use that as an ornamental, actually, in some places. Yes.
Absolutely. There should be. Well, we can just barely make them out. If you kind of get even, if you look straight out, you see some tall spikes that aren't these plumes. That's big blue stem, which is another native. Actually, one of the other really dominant species in the tall grass prairie. This particular patch.
Now, the average person might not, the layperson might not understand when you say, yes, it has very deep roots. This one does. I mean, I understand that, for instance, alfalfa can sometimes go at 20 to 80 feet. Yeah. It can go down. So
I don't know what the record for Sorghastrum nutans is, but I'd be surprised if it wasn't minimally here 12 or more feet deep.
So for an area that has heavy clay soils, that's really nice because that pulls up those nutrients from the bottom.
Lots of minerals.
Yeah, so it's actually really, really beneficial to get nutrients to the top, minerals when the roots die off, the aeration of the soil.
Aeration, the organic matter that sloughs off from the dying roots, and then the little channels, it helps. It actually really helps, and you're depositing organic matter a lot deeper than just on the surface.
Now, I have chickens, so I read a little bit of the Joel Salatin type concept. Yeah, really interesting stuff. He's probably one of the best known ones that does the chicken tractor thing. Yeah. But the concept is true. When you have something that comes through, utilizes what otherwise might be a waste product, drops remaining product, and then you start to gain that insect population, the invertebrate population.
Right.
So the entirety of the thing becomes synergistic, but it's a lazy man's way of farming that just because you don't have to feed the chickens, you get the and yet
you have something to sell when you're done.
You have something to sell, and yet if you'd sprayed that same crop,
you would have used petroleum to drive the rig. You would have paid lots of money for the chemicals.
You have to feed your chickens in on top of it.
Feed the chickens, yeah, exactly.
Yes, so it's just, it seems like a tree hugger concept. I'm somewhat of a tree hugger myself, so that's not pejorative necessarily.
No, you can say that around me. That's
yes,
all right.
but it really is just smart. It seems to me. Yeah. Pasture restoration and crop management and animal management.
So I was. I go to a fair number of conferences, sometimes for mainstream agriculture, just to sort of see where it is. and other times for alternative sort of, I don't know what else to call it, smaller scale typically, but not always. And it's really fun and interesting. And I think I can put my finger on part of the problem for what I would call conventional agriculture. Some people call it mainstream agriculture or whatever. But it's hugely driven by agriculture economists. And so you can pencil out, all these inputs and all $1 million worth of equipment and, tens of thousands of dollars of spray and fertilizer and what have you. And if you can get a certain yield and a certain price, numerically it'll work, but you'll sell bushels of corn, 100,000 bushels of corn, and you'll be lucky to pay all of your expenses and have left a quarter, 25 cents a bushel. A lot of times it's pennies a bushel, and a lot of times you're negative.
Okay, now you're talking about high production?
Yeah.
So this computation is interesting to me because we have a tendency to say output
Right.
is the best thing.
It's wrong. It's wrong-headed, I think. I personally think. Who does it serve? It serves the input and the machinery companies. Sure, can some guys make $500,000 a year on 20,000 acres? Yeah, you can run a pretty decent-sized business there, and you're cash flowing millions, but you're not keeping very much.
I was researching the Brabant horses. I don't know if you know about Brabants. Okay, so it's draft horses used. And one of the gentlemen whose websites I came across was a dairy farmer. And he said that he bought into that mentality that says more is better. So he bought another tractor, and then he bought more dairy cattle, and they bought milking machines. And they were still in the red, I forgot, 4 out of 5 years.
Oh, yeah.
All the time. But they had this big facility, and they were really working hard, and it's just a lot of labor. Well, he finally said, I just can't do this anymore. And he was researching things, and he actually went back to horses.
I love it.
And he dropped down to, I think it's something like 40 head.
Yeah, I love it.
And he went to it's still a high producing cow, but it's not 25 gallons a day, And the Brabants is what he used.
I love it.
And he's now in the red. He's down to something like 2 out of 5 years on average, which is an amazing difference.
Yeah.
From doing something that's a little less intense. It doesn't mean that the production's not important, but 20% profit margin is 20% profit margin no matter how you get there.
Right. And if it's not scalable, I mean, what we're always told is that if you want to scale, you have to get bigger and be happier with a smaller margin.
Yes.
Get bigger, be happier with a smaller margin. And in some instances, in some businesses, that can work.
Okay, so again, back to the heritage animals, the efficiency of the thing is one of the keys, correct?
Yes, yeah. In modern agriculture, we talk about efficiency, and that almost always means monetary efficiency. And one of the things that we always try to teach folks is that they can look at their labor as an input that they have as much as they have. You might not have a lot of cash to invest in your project, but if you've got labor, you can make a lot of stuff happen a lot slower, but you're not paying on a loan, you're not paying interest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when you have, you manage to hand do 3 acres of sweet corn, which is possible, 2 people easily possible. It's work, and if you direct market that in a really smart way, you might come out of there with $10,000 or $12,000.
Yeah.
That's probably not gonna give you the great lifestyle you want for the year. But if somebody really wants to do a little bit of farming, I'd like to see anybody who no conventional farmer can pull $12,000 off of 3 acres. Yeah. And I'm just doing that, figuring about 20,000 ears per acre, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But I could be short on it. We know a guy up in Canada who basically makes who nets about $70,000 a year on, I think, about a half acre.
Holy cow.
and they do microgreens, and they do like baby carrots and things like that. And they have a pretty good collection of retail customers, but a lot of their business is wholesale. So lots of, I think it's near Toronto, if I remember, but one of those cities, one of those Canadian cities. Yeah, so they've got a bunch of restaurants that love their greens and their carrots and things like that. So is it hard work? Yeah, and a quarter acre.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, a quarter to a half an acre, I think.
You know, a lot of the people we talk to are actually retirees, and they don't want to have to go out and manage something heavily.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily want to have to call the vet every 20 minutes.
Right.
And so, you know, it's interesting to me how you can go down that little checklist and say, okay, fewer vet bills, less worming, this, that, and the other. And
less inputs.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, the Bruce Pettish has Piney Woods. He says, you know, I wanted to be a cowboy, and so he's a retired attorney. He went out to North Carolina, he bought a farm, and he's raising Piney Woods. And he said, I went out to, you know, to help them during calving season, and I'm expecting that, he says, they don't want me, they don't need me. They go in the forest, they have a baby, they come back 2 days later, and then with a calf, and that's it. It's amazing to me the difference in some of these, whether it be a seed, a vegetable, an animal. Yeah. No,
it's absolutely the case. And I think that's what we sort of forget. I mean, I know, you know, there are a lot of Angus ranchers out there and Angus farmers, purebred, you know, who still pull a lot of calves. You know, there's ways to make that not happen. You can use genetics to your advantage. One of the problems is, and we touched on this earlier, is that, so the Angus carcass, the selection for the Angus carcass isn't really, mothering ability is part of the selection process, and calving ease is part of the selection process for bulls. But really that animal has been bred to basically fit primals in a box so that they can be shipped wherever they go. You know, sides of beef don't wind up at the grocery store anymore like they used to. It all comes in a box. There's, you know, the loin and whatever, and they do a little bit of cutting and packaging. And the Angus breed specifically, you know, they asked the packers what they wanted, and the packers basically told the grocery chains what they needed, and that animal is designed to do that. That's
amazing. So we built small and white turkeys like that, right? They wanted a turkey that fit in that refrigerator at that time, and that was it. Yeah. No, it's totally true. And they love the white ones because, you know, if there's a little piece of feather shaft that's left behind, or a little pin feather, it doesn't look gross because it's not black. Well, we only buy perfect apples, right? If you try and sell non-perfect apples, it's not going to happen. We have facilitated we have maximized our ability to sell a product to a not so savvy, farm savvy, we'll say, computer. Yeah, well, because of consumers. I'm from the city. When do I ever get to see what goes on a farm? And so
and then they push us into price shopping, and I don't think food should be cheap. I think food should be expensive. We'll have a lot less waste. We'd probably have a lot less waste.
I think it should, in my opinion, I think it should reflect the actual cost of the thing. I pay $10 a pound for hamburger in San Diego because I want to be able to know where the farm is. I want that thing to be raised in a certain way that I feel comfortable with.
Absolutely.
Feel comfortable ingesting, and that's what it costs.
Yeah, and if it means you eat it much less often, so be it, right? Yeah.
But we're also not getting the same variety we used to in our food system.
That's totally
because we're living in a can, and I'm one that's an example of that. We used to eat seasonally, and so you'd have a connection with the seasons that you realize. Squash are in the fall. I mean, we have pumpkins out now and at Halloween, but you don't really. Squash is a seasonal thing. Cabbage is a seasonal thing, and then there's summer fruits, and you used to eat that way. But now everything's available all the time.
Yeah.
And so again, that connection that people are looking for these days, we could get that in our food system. We just don't seem to do that as much.
Yeah, I think we've moved away from it, although I think there is really a groundswell of folks that are looking for something real and looking for a little bit of control We're fairly chaotic right now in terms of society and whatnot, and world really in some ways. And if you put the blinders on and you focus on your little piece of ground, maybe you can raise some chickens and have eggs, and maybe you can grow all of your salad greens at least for part of the season, and maybe you can grow enough tomatoes to can, whatever the things are that you like. And I think that makes people feel more secure. I know that we talk about food deserts in this country, and there are plenty of them in Kansas, bona fide food deserts where the closest thing for 60 miles is, the Casey's. But I think a much larger population in this country is actually food insecure, because they can't get, or they can't afford, or they think they can't afford the stuff that they really need, and so they price shop it.
I would argue that whether or not they think they are food secure, they're very much insecure. They very much are food insecure.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the hurricane that happened recently,
right.
Michael, and one day, and people don't know how to eat. They don't know how to make light. They don't know how to make heat.
No.
We have made ourselves go away from the victory garden concept.
Absolutely.
Not just with food, but we are
with
not
life.
Self-sufficient with life in general.
With like fundamental skills.
Yes. And that's
I couldn't imagine.
Not
knowing how to get a fire going, not knowing how to forage, at least for a few days. I might not love it, but
it's a concept. It's not a bad thing to get back to.
Yeah.
And one thing I did want to ask you about was diversity.
Yeah.
Because we talk about biodiversity with animals as a good thing, and you have probably a fairly broad readership that kind of represents all avenues of life.
Sure.
One of the interesting things we found is that more than half the farmers that we've interviewed are women.
Oh, I love
as going across the country. It's,
that makes sense to me, though. That makes total sense to me.
Well, it does historically, because women were on the farm and they were doing the eggs and the chickens naturally.
Right.
The men stayed out of that.
Yeah.
You might do other physical things, but you were as much a part of the functioning of the farm as the men.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, but
they were the food producers, really, for the family.
Producers. Yes.
They did the garden.
Yes.
Yeah.
We also had a diverse demographic in terms of sexual preferences.
Right.
But we don't have a whole lot of diversity in the remainder. It's still, the average farmer's 58 years old now, they say. But it's
I'm above average.
But it's
Finally.
land-based. It's a land-based proposition, and so you're either inheriting the land from the people that had it before, or it's a very interesting mix.
Or you cash in your 401k to buy a piece, or
you're a retired lawyer.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. You had enough other kinds of investment that allowed it.
Yes, but it's a changing demographic across this country. And we are realizing that there's not only different people that are coming into farming, but different consumers that we're selling to. So I've heard a lot of farmers talk about the ability to sell goat meat and sheep meat in ways that they couldn't before.
Right.
So you talk a little bit about that and what your readership is reflecting.
Yeah, so I think our I look at the goat and the sheep as like sort of the gateway grazers, because they're less intimidating, maybe than a cow. But and easier to sell, I think, because it's it's a smaller cash outlay, and all of that. I think in terms of the demographic that purchases your goats or your sheep for food, for meat, it actually is so beautifully refreshing, because it puts you in direct contact with completely not mainstream American cultures and religions, for whom those kinds of creatures are not only important for them culturally and nutritionally, but also as part of their sort of religious tradition. So for us, for example, we have a very large Muslim community in Lawrence, which is just 40 miles away from here or so, and then Kansas City, which is about 100 miles from here. And these folks will come out to look over our sheep, and they're the ones they want to buy, because we don't treat them, they're not full of chemicals, and they've never had grain.
So they're more, I mean, are they really more interested in how you grow them than the average consumer? That's amazing to me.
And they want the males to be intact. There's yeah.
We should all be so intelligent about our food.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And in some cases, these folks will have a location where they actually they all know how to kill and process their own, because it needs to be done a specific way, and there aren't very many butchers in the state that do it that way, I think.
Now, we were talking before we cut for a moment there about animals that are adapted.
Oh yeah.
And the thing that came to my mind was also Wyoming and Montana. There's a book that's on my reading list. It's called Lentil Underground.
Oh yeah, it's an awesome book.
Is it a good book?
Oh.
I wanted to. It's on my list, and I've got it at home. But talking about things that are adapted to certain climates.
Yeah.
And economics and how they played a part in it. And again, just from the quick run through that I did.
Oh my God.
You know, talking about how they adapted something that requires very little resources.
Right.
And works beautifully, and it's a high protein food.
Yeah.
I mean,
No.
And yet we don't utilize it as much as we might.
Absolutely. I mean, there's that all over the place, because you can't grow 10,000 acres of it, get in a big machine and harvest it and send it to the elevator where it's marketed for you. You actually have to develop the market. That's the hard part of every business, is developing the market and maintaining that market. So, you know, I think we've got, that is going to sound horrible, but I love machinery. I love seat time. I love working soil. I love making hay, because I get to run cool machines, which I like. But I think we have a lot of farmers who that's really what they want to do. They want to make some money running heavy equipment, and they don't have to worry about the marketing piece. Send it to the elevator, there's a global market, it gets shipped somewhere. They take the price. I mean, what other business allows sort of an investment sort of cartel set the price? This is what we'll pay.
So I'm assuming that small farmers now, in order to tell that story, the internet and social media are really helpful that way.
Yeah.
Because we're in the middle of Kansas, right? I mean,
Right.
how do you find your market here?
No, especially for direct marketing, and we don't at this point do farmers markets. There was a point in time when I did do farmers markets, but it's a time constraint, and it's also political. You know, I don't like to have to deal with farmers market organizations and rules, so I'd rather just deal with the customers directly if we can. There are times when you can't. So it's crucial, right? It's crucial, because you can reach so many people in your community, and people can find you sort of randomly, spontaneously, or by connection with other people. And you have a place to send them to kind of get a feel for you, for your story. What are you about? And then you help them see, why do they want to buy my Highland beef, or why do they want to buy my landrace lamb, as opposed to the grocery store? And we never beat up any other farmers. In fact, all of us small-scale people-feeding farmers, most of us tend to work together, because we believe, certainly I believe, that rising tides float all boats. That's why I don't have any secrets that I don't share with somebody. Somebody comes out and says, well, how did you get that to happen? And I would happily explain it to them, because they're never going to do it exactly the same as I do anyway, and they're going to take that knowledge and maybe adapt it to their own location.
But you know, the thing that you're describing, where you have the relationship with the consumer and the consumer has a relationship with you, this is the old country store all over the place, isn't
Absolutely.
it? You walk in and you have a sense of community, you have a sense of connection. It seems to be the synergistic thing that is greater than the sum of its parts, and everybody benefits.
Yeah. So
it's a beautiful thing.
So my parents are still alive, and even though they're from North Dakota, or I guess Mom was from western Minnesota, but they settled some years ago in New Hampshire, because Dad moved his business out there. Mom really likes the coast and stuff. And I'll get texts from her and calls occasionally. And they're like 86 and 89. And she has her lard lady, and she has her tomato lady, and she has her chicken man at the farmer's market that she goes to. And And she has choices on all of that, but she knows exactly why. She goes, oh, let me tell you what I heard from my lard lady today. She said that this stuff has, more omega, or a different ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. And she goes, now what does that mean, Hank? And why is that good,
But now you know the lard lady too.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And I give a talk periodically on the real value of doing this.
Yes.
And we talk about economic utility, and we talk about conceptual utility in using the econ terms, right? And that this is part of the utility of this entire project for me. It's not just about the money. You need money, but the entire prospect, there's easier ways to make money. But the entire prospect of this and managing a piece of land to benefit the land and you and people, other people, that's compelling to me. Yeah. So we don't play golf,
You don't
I
play.
don't belong to the country club.
Yeah.
I have discretionary money that I can spend in different ways. Yeah. But because I am somewhat anal about it, my farms always have to pay their way plus, or I get antsy about it. I feel like I'm not doing it real enough if they don't cover their expenses.
Well,
without necessarily, I don't pay myself very much. I mean, we dip into the account periodically, but
that's what sustainability is about, isn't it?
Right.
It's making it make its own way,
right.
Where you don't have to constantly be in the hole.
Right. Right.
And to me, that's just
yeah.
It's just a more comfortable way.
Who doesn't want to have an avocation that they love that doesn't cost them anything, other than a little joint wear and stuff?
Which we all have.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, I think I hear them.
Okay.
So let's go this way, because it's going to be too messy going all the way up there.
Well, you should have seen what we went through yesterday. That was very interesting.